And we're live.
Hey, everybody. It's Jake Tapper. I'm here with New York Times bestselling novelist Michael Connelly, and we are doing an event. I'm going to ask him a bunch of questions. He might have some questions for me, and we're going to chat. But first, I do want to note. I know that we have a lot of Michael Connelly fans on. I do want to note we're not strictly doing this out of the goodness of our hearts, even though Michael has a brand new novel that is fantastic called Fair Warning that you can buy just by clicking right there. But in addition to that, past there's a donate button on the bottom, and that donate button goes to a thing called BINC, which is the Book Industry Charitable Foundation. It's to help independent bookstores, which, as you might imagine, are not having a very easy time during this pandemic. They already struggle because of the competition from behemoth Amazon, and not being able to open their stores is really, really tough for them. So if you have the means to donate, even if it's just $5, please click on the donate button. I'm going to pester you just a couple times throughout this thing. The money goes, just so you know, to help the booksellers keep their space, to help people who work at these independent bookstores feed their families. And it also, they say the Bing Foundation is receiving an average of 5 requests a day for help with housing, stability, food, essential medications, medical procedures, and other unexpected life events, spouse having a heart attack and the like. So if you can donate, please do. Michael, just on the topic of favorite independent bookstores, do you have a favorite independent bookstore? Is there one you particularly like?
Oh man, that would be hard to pick one. I've been crossing the country for almost 30 years, being in bookstores. There's so many of them, from Our Julia up in Connecticut down through Mysterious Bookshop in New York, out in LA. There's Book Soup, Romans, just tons of stores all over the place. I couldn't pick one. I did a virtual event last night with Poison Pen. And I think that was my first virtual event, and I think I did my very first book signing back in 1992 there as well.
Oh wow!
And they're still there, still surviving. And as you say, it's tough. So it's great to do something like this, not only to meet you virtually or online, but to do something that may raise awareness and some money for this really important part of our culture.
You and I were talking before this. You spent the first 12 years of your life in my hometown, your former hometown, Philadelphia. I don't know, what part of Philadelphia were you in?
Well, I was born in the Upper Darby area, and then my parents, the family started moving west. Yeah, so we lived in Wayne, Devon, Berwyn. We were progressing out I guess it's the main line.
Okay.
And then when I was 12, I moved to Florida.
So, but you're an Eagles fan, which is all that really matters as far as I'm concerned.
It's always remained Eagles.
Yeah.
The hard luck team until a couple years ago.
Pete Dexter is an author I read a lot about, and he started off as a Philadelphia journalist, writing. I don't know how much of his stuff you've ever read, but
I read it all. Yeah.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, and oddly or coincidentally, we ended up not at the same time, but we both worked at a little paper in Fort Lauderdale where my family moved when I was 12. I ended up working for the newspaper there, the Sun Sentinel, and he was an alumni of having worked there before he started writing novels and went back to Philadelphia and worked for papers there as well.
I assume you know Steve Lopez also, who's a Philadelphian turned Los Angeles Times reporter and writer.
Yeah, great writer. He's written a few crime novels, but his columns, and he's been the main chronicler of the homeless issue or homeless problem that plagues Los Angeles. It's kind of Lopez is out in front on that.
He's great. Well, let's talk about Fair Warning, because it also is. You have several characters that you revisit. Bosch, of course, is your most famous one, and also the star of the Amazon series. But Jack McAvoy is the main character of Fair Warning, as well as previous novels that he alludes to in Fair Warning, the Poet and Scarecrow. I was interested to find out that, so Jack McAvoy writes for, in Fair Warning, he writes for a consumer publication called fairwarning.org. And that's a real publication that you're on the board of directors of.
Yeah, it was, it's a symptom of what's going on in the media business, as you're well aware, that the newspaper crunch or the implosion of newspapers has led to a lot of websites and internet news organizations. This is one of them. It's pretty much founded by a guy. He's actually in the book, Myron Levin, who I worked with when I was a newspaper reporter, and he started this with a very tight focus on consumer protection and so forth. And I've been a supporter of it financially, and I became a board member. And water seeking its own level, I went to them and said, "Hey, I'm going to write about Jack McAvoy for the first time in about 11 years, and this is where a lot of the newspaper business is headed. I'd like to write about Fair Warning." And there was a board vote, and I got approved. I think I had an inside track on that.
Well, what's great about it, you did so much research for the topic, and again, I don't want to spoil it for anybody there in terms of, like, the industry that you probe, but what it's almost like is as if you did a lot of research for an actual expose of this problem of this industry in the United States that has basically zero oversight by the government, and then instead of writing that nonfiction newspaper story or article for fairwarning.org, you just did like the worst case scenario of how this lack of oversight could be exploited.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's my job. I needed a starting point, and that's Fair Warning. But Jack is kind of like a square peg in a round hole at that place, and he has what we know from prior books. And so he gets a piece of this and goes off running, and it's not really a Fair Warning story, but in a way he kind of makes it that way.
The Fair Warning, consumer publication, consumer website.
Yeah, I mean, there's a tie into that, and there's real journalism in the story, and that's about the security of DNA and so forth. And the book mirrors my own research, where I kind of went down this rabbit hole. It all started with probably a story on CNN where the Pentagon last year told members of the military in the United States not to submit their DNA to these analytic sites because of concerns over security. So that phrase, concerns over security, struck me because I know millions of people are doing this. So what are the concerns? And I started looking into it, and it's, at the present time, it's very much a, as one character says in the book, it's kind of the Wild West when it comes to government oversight of that industry. I'm not saying anything's going wrong. My job in fiction is to find that stuff or invent it. But the reality is there's not a lot of oversight, if any.
Yeah, no, it was fascinating to read it. And then I don't know if you're probably the same kind of reader, is that often I'll read, like when I read Fair Warning, and then I'll be Googling at the same time to see how much of this is real and how much of it is not. And it was amazing to find out that the genetic, I don't know what you call it, genetic hobbying industry, submitting your swab so that you can find out your ethnicity, your roots, making a family tree, whatever, that none of that stuff is their oversight. And then you found a fascinating way for this to be like something that Jack McAvoy needs to investigate. Do you like, you've said that Jack McAvoy is the easiest character for you to write as because he is the one who is most similar to you as a journalist, as opposed to Bosch or other characters. That you still feel that way?
Yeah, I mean, I got, big asterisk here. I've not been a working journalist in 25 years.
Right.
But I still have the instincts of it. And there's some journalism that goes into my books and so forth. And so there's a pause when I write about Harry Bosch or anybody, Lincoln Lawyer, Renee Ballard, where I have to think about based on what I know about this fictional character, what would they do here? What would they say? And oftentimes it's a legal answer because it's a lawyer or it's a detective work, and that takes time to research and ask questions and so forth. When it comes to writing about Jack, I just write what I would say. I instantly make him make choices that I would make, and so that streamlines the writing process, and that's why the McAvoy books are the ones I write the fastest.
Yeah. And you, is McAvoy the, I have to go back and read it or watch it, but in season 1 of Bosch on Amazon, is Jack McAvoy the jerk from the LA Times that does the expose on Bosch?
No.
That's a different guy. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I got a lot of pushback from that because that was kind of a stock character, and so a lot of people said I had just, betrayed the tribe, and I think that's a valid criticism. And I've worked in seasons past to make the media and particularly the print journalists in the stories more realistic to my experience.
Oh, okay. I didn't mind it.
Less antagonistic.
Well, I mean, different reporter, like anything, like some reporters are jerks and some reporters are not jerks. When you do so much research for your novels, do you ever find yourself, and I guess this is where a good editor or a good self-editing ability comes in handy, like sharing too much just because you found all this interesting stuff, but it might not actually help the plot go along, and you have to, killing your darlings? Was it the Faulkner said that? Killing your darlings?
Yeah.
You find that happening?
Yeah, it's definitely a finessing thing that, you, like I already said, I went down this rabbit hole. A lot of fascinating stuff, and you just got to go by instinct and try to keep momentum. Momentum is the key thing in a story for me, and you can't let it's so different from what you do on your day job and what you do in fiction. The worst thing you could say to a real reporter is he doesn't let the facts get in the way of a story.
Right.
But a novelist, that's what you got to do.
Right.
You got to keep things going, and and so research is fun, but invariably you kind of learn not to use everything just because you found out about something. You don't have to use everything.
Yeah, no, the momentum is so important. It's really ultimately all you have is either somebody finished the book or they didn't finish the book, right? There are a bunch of books that I started that I just ultimately didn't finish. None of them yours. Yours are great, but that's really the test. Nobody wants to pick up a book that they don't care what happens next.
Right. But while we're on the subject of research, this book has an unusual 10 pages of sourcing. And so talk about research.
Yeah.
You have really recreated the early 50s, 54, that era, the McCarthyism, the Red Scare. And I have 3 questions, but the first one was just fascinating to you and you already had a knowledge, or you just went down your own rabbit hole?
I went down a rabbit hole. Yeah. I always wanted to write a novel, and I always wanted to write it about a secret society in Washington. And then I found out, and then I read about Benjamin Franklin visiting this famous club when he was up in the UK called the HELLFIRE CLUB. And then the premise was just like, well, what if they brought that here? And then I tried writing a present day story, and I kept getting tripped up. And this is something that people who write in the modern era like you do have to deal with, or maybe don't have as difficult a time. But I kept getting tripped up because everything I would come up with, it would be like, well, why didn't he just Google that? Or, well, why didn't he just call him on his iPhone? And so I said, okay, you know what? Maybe I should just go back. And then the McCarthy era was just something that I was always very fascinated by, and Eisenhower. And I started just really, the novel, the HELLFIRE CLUB, was 20 years in the making, just in terms of trying to come on. And I wasn't a novelist, so it wasn't like I had an editor saying, Michael, where's your next novel? So it took a long time. But then, yeah, I went down rabbit hole, and then I wanted to show the work. I was a good history student in college, and I wanted to show the work. And so, like, when I had a detail of like Joe McCarthy eating a stick of butter when he was getting drunk, because it was real, he would really do that. I wanted people to be able to say, "Oh, he really would do that. He really would eat a stick of butter when he was drunk."
Well, I should have done that with fair warning, because at the back of it, I just have like a one paragraph saying this is all based on real science as is known today. But I've gotten some reviews that say, like, if this is really true, this is really fascinating, or Connelly verging on science fiction, and I'm not. And so maybe I should have done the 10-page thing. But the next question, I'm shocked to hear that you said it's 20 years in the making, because it almost, I mean, I know the book's been out a couple of years, but it almost felt to me that you made some kind of conscious decision that said, to write about what's going on right now, I think it might be best to go into the past and tell a similar story. And so I'm just wondering, was any of this written during the
Yes.
the current administration?
Well, let's see. The book came out.
Or no?
I will say I had the basic plot before the presidential election, and I was working on it. But there's this old cliche: history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And the more I read about the McCarthy era while experiencing then candidate and now President Trump, and there's a connective tissue. Joe McCarthy's protege was Roy Cohn, and Roy Cohn's protege was Donald Trump. And there are a lot of the same kind of tactics, and a lot of the same, by the way, criticisms of the media, of like not knowing how to handle somebody who just comes and says things that are not true about other people, as we're seeing President Trump do about Joe Scarborough, for example, from MSNBC. So I will say that in the second draft, the role of McCarthy and Cohn got bigger because of the era and the rhyming that I was hearing.
Which my third question was kind of covered this, and I have an example of from my own life and my own writing. But with what the situation is in Washington and in politics in general, could you even write a novel that even touches on reality? And is that part of the dilemma you must face? I assume you're going to write another novel, or are writing one. Is it set in Washington 2020, or are you staying away from that?
That's fun. Okay, so first of all, you couldn't write this. I mean, like, if you handed in, President Gold attacks Baltimore as rat infested, and then it turns out, his rich son-in-law actually owns slums in Baltimore, your editor would say, "Come on, Michael, that's way too broad." I mean, isn't that a little on the nose? Isn't that a little obvious? But that's what we're living in. We're living in this world where, things that are too broad for fiction are actually happening. I am writing a sequel right now, and it takes place in Los Angeles. It's Charlie and Margaret, the same characters, and it takes place in Los Angeles in 1961, 1962. So like early Kennedy, Rat Pack, that kind of era, and it will have resonance and rhyming to things going on today, but not as much about politics as much as pop culture, I think. I hope. It's weird writing, and tell me what you think about this. It's weird writing a sequel, because I also don't know how much I have to include about Charlie and Margaret. I guess you have to assume to a degree that somebody's reading it and hasn't read the first one. So you have to provide some information, but you don't want to like repeat yourself. And what do you do I mean, I guess it's different when you're like on the fifth or sixth book about somebody, but when you're in the second, what do you do?
It's funny. I just have never, maybe it's a gigantic ego. I just assumed everyone read the first book or whatever.
Yeah.
So I I act like the book's its own world, and then if someone likes that one, maybe they'll go back. I also, because of the nature of, most of my books are about Harry Bosch, and there's a homicide case, and that makes the books episodic. I don't think it hurts to read the books in any order. There's some stuff about his family that informs other books, and that's the only place where I feel a reader might feel left out or might get confused. But I think it's a very minor part of the storytelling. So I kind of write blindly, and each book kind of stands on its own, even if it's number 15 in a series or whatever.
So you've written 33 novels, I think. 33.
I think this is 34.
Okay. So, and you've had real success in people wanting to make them into TV shows and movies. So let me ask you: I love the Amazon series. I just think it's fantastic. I'm only in season 2, and you told me before it gets even better. I just think it's great. How do you feel about it? Is it weird having your characters that really only existed in your head and your heart on the screen? I mean, I know that you're an executive producer, so you must feel pretty good about it. But like, do you ever? What's your feeling about it? What's your candid emotion on it?
Well, I mean, I'm very proud of the show. I think the show is great, and it's a great approximation of the character of Bosch. And it's much more so than the book. It's the real LA. In the book, I describe stuff. We're showing it. So it has that aspect that I think is an improvement on the books. And as I told you, and I'm not just blowing smoke, I think we've gotten better as we've gone along. And it's a rare thing for a show to get better year to year, but I absolutely believe it's gotten better year to year. So it's kind of like with books. Like, I never send someone back and they say, "Hey, I want to start reading you. Should I start at the beginning?" I never say start at my first book, because I've gotten better at it. And so when you say I'm in season 2, I cringe a little bit, because those are good seasons, but the show gets better. But the big thing, to get back to your question, was at the beginning, do I even do this? Because I write like I read. I love creating in my head when I read a book. Like Charlie Martyr, putting him together in my head, and that's what is just sacred about reading. And that's something I preached for 20 years before this show came along. So I kept going from, hey, build Harry Bosch in your head yourself. And now I'm saying, this is exactly what he looks like, and this is what he sounds like, and this is what the city looks like. And I knew that would be difficult for a lot of readers. And I've got anecdotal responses at book tours and so forth from people say, I can't watch the show until you're done writing the books and I've read them all. Then maybe I'll watch the show, because they built Harry Bosch, and I really respect that. But at the same time, I realize I could sure use them as viewers, because that thing is, numbers in Hollywood.
And I assume that it brings you more readers. I mean, I assume that people watch the show and think, oh, I want to, like, it helps with book sales, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, it's an inexact science. I don't know many, but I know it happens because, it's the social media. There's people all over the place that join my social media, say, I found you through the show, and I found your books through the show. So it definitely has that effect. I know the HELLFIRE Club is being developed by HBO. You do all kinds of stuff. You're editorial cartoonist. You're on Sunday show. You got your daily show. I don't even know how you find time to write a novel, but are you going to dip into that water as well? We got the show.
There's a guy, the guy who wrote or co-wrote The Revenant, Mark Smith, is going to be the showrunner. It's HBO. It's going to be in the streaming service, HBO Max. And right now he's finishing up another project, and then he's going to take a dive in. I'm going to be. I mean, I don't know how you went about it when they started doing Bosch. I mean, I'll be involved. I do know that there are people who know a lot more about writing TV shows than I do. And so I don't want to. I want them to do a good job. I mean, I could sit down and write a season, and it would be nothing compared to what Mark Smith is going to do. I mean, so I don't want to. I don't want to infringe. I want him to feel like he can do what he wants to do, within reason. I don't, I want to stay within the parameters of the world that I built.
Right.
But that said, we are talking about casting. We are talking about who would be a dream person to cast as Charlie. Who would be in. So he's 34 and a young congressman, and he's a war hero from World War II, and that everybody. So I'm 51, so all of my contemporary actors are way too old to play Charlie. So any actor I'm friends with would have to be like Joe McCarthy or Dwight Eisenhower or other people from that era. But so I don't even know half the actors that Mark Smith talks about, because I'm just like, I don't watch television. I watch like Titus, I watch people my age or older are the people that I watch on television. So, what about The Lincoln Lawyer? Were you happy with that?
Yeah, no, I mean, movies and TV are different animals. I didn't have any involvement in the two movies that were made. I always say, what's that?
Blood Work. That's the other one, right?
Yeah,
I love that movie. That was great.
Well, the only control the writer has when it comes to movies, in my opinion at least, is picking who you give it to. Because then they're just going to pat you on the head and say, run along, go write another novel or whatever it is you do, and we'll make this movie. TV's so different. It's a writer's medium, and, if you want, as the author of your book, you'll most likely have the involvement you want to have, and you got other things going on, and it's on the other side of the country and so forth. But on the Bosch show, I wanted to be involved because I've been writing about this character for so long. I wanted to kind of safeguard him, so I kind of went with him, and it's been a very good experience.
I'm also I would be punched in the face if I didn't mention that a nonfiction book I wrote about Afghanistan called The Outpost has been turned into a movie that comes out in theaters July 2nd and on video on demand if you don't want to go to the movie theater, which would be understandable, on July 3rd. So it's a true story about Afghanistan. That was weirder, I think, than having fictional characters brought to life in film or TV, because these were real people that I wrote about, and that was a really strange experience. Now I know you wrote one nonfiction book, right?
Not really. It was a collection of my journalism, and so we published the stories, and then I wrote little essays about how it connected to what I was doing with my fiction.
Do you ever think about nonfiction, or no? You love what you're doing?
No, I mean, for years I was saying that I went from the strictures of journalism and getting it right and all that stuff, and it's so free to write fiction, and I didn't want to ever look back. But as time goes by, I think more and more about doing it and looking around for that story that I could do it with. And let's steer this back to kind of the DC, and one reason I wrote Fair Warning was I wanted to write about a journalist, because in this time, they're under fire. The media is under fire. It's a kind of a shoot the messenger world out there, and I write fiction. What can I do about it? So I wrote a story about a dedicated, unbiased, undaunted, seeker of truth, and so maybe there's a political message in that. I don't know, but that's why I wrote that, and I jumped that further to say, you know what, I might tell a true story next time or next year. So I'm kind of fishing around for the story that I could tell that might have I'm sure it'll be a crime type of thing, but hopefully would be a story that has another level of resonance, that has some kind of meaning and culture.
You haven't been a journalist for a while. Do you remember, do you have a favorite story that you worked on, or a story that you worked on that really you were proud of, that comes to mind?
Yeah, a lot of them. I think, often, at least in the print world, you get one story, you get a big ride out of it, you get job offers and stuff like that. And I spent a story on with two other reporters on a plane crash, and that really changed my life. We did a great series of stories, and I was in basically my adopted hometown of Fort Lauderdale when the LA Times came calling, and I took that job. And coming here really fired my, I'd wanted to be a novelist since I was in college, but it came coming to LA to get that inspiration for some reason. And so things started happening once I came out here, and I really can credit it to that story. So kind of a lucky thing.
What was the story about?
There was a Delta crash. A plane left Fort Lauderdale, was stopping in Dallas and going to Los Angeles in 1985, and it crashed. It was the wind shear. They put in wind shear equipment in planes because of this crash. And what made it kind of unique was that even though it was a major airline crash, crashed on landing at DFW, there were 29 survivors. So me and two other reporters spent a year finding and talking to the survivors. We got 28 out of 29 to spend some significant time with us.
Wow.
So we did one story recreating the crash, and one story recreating their day leading up to it, and then the aftermath. And it was a really good story and a good ride. And it's rare that you can get cut loose for a year to write work on one story.
Well, there's again, I don't want to spoil fair warning for anybody, because it really is such a great read, and I read it in like 2 days. It's a real page turner. But the you write a story, you write a newspaper story in it. I mean, there's a story in it. Jack McAvoy and his partner finally file the piece, and you can. It's funny because you can tell that a journalist wrote that story, because it's really.
I appreciate that, because that was the first one I've written in like 25 years, and I had to think about it a little bit, to remember the who, what, when, and where stuff, and the routines of that. It's interesting to go from a life where you're given, they always, back then at least, would give you inches, like you got 12 inches. That's a 12-inch story. That's a 3-inch story. To go from that to writing 100,000-word books is a big change, and so it was a little unusual to dive back into that.
I need to remind people that right down there at the bottom of the screen, you see it says donate, and that Michael and I are doing this event to benefit the Book Industry Charitable Foundation, or BINC, or I'm sorry, BINC. That's what it's called, and it helps independent bookstores that are struggling. It helps their employees, and if you have the means to donate, please do. I don't know if now would be a good time, probably, for me to read some of the questions that are here for us. So I'm not going to be able to get to all of them, of course, but Michael, let me start with, will you be developing a solid career path for Maddie in future books? A first person from her would be quite the story. For those of you who don't know, Maddie is Bosch's daughter. Have you given any thought to that?
Yeah, the groundwork is there. My books go in real time, so she's about 23, and I created a female detective or cop a few years ago named Ballard, and when I was doing that, I thought maybe I should keep this story till Maddie's a little older and make that character Maddie, but I ended up feeling too urgent about the story, so I created a new character. I've always thought that Maddie could the baton could be passed to Maddie, and that might happen. It all depends on how long I get to write. But she needs, you connect on these stories, as through character, and she needs to live a little bit every season. She needs to have some experiences. I know she's had trauma in her young life, but she needs to be more worldly, I think, to carry a book, as opposed to be a character that floats in and out of other stories. And so I'm aware of that, and I'm watching that, and someday that might come to pass.
Who was your original inspiration for Bosch?
You cut out there. Who was my what?
Your original inspiration for Bosch.
Oh, it was all over the place. It was movies, books, fictional detectives. You know, I've been a police reporter for years and years, so I had known hundreds of cops. I took a little bit from there, and I covered, before I came to LA, I covered police in Fort Lauderdale, and there was a sergeant named Sergeant Hurt, who was in charge of the homicide squad, and I knew him pretty well and did stories kind of like at his side at crime scenes and so forth. And a lot of his character, he was a Vietnam vet, a lot of his stuff ended up in Bosch, even though it was set in LA. So speaking of inspirations, you get to write in your book. You create Edward R. Murrow, and I assume he's a hero of yours. And what care and thought went into writing a scene with him?
So Edward R. Murrow is a hero of mine, but Charlie is a congressman, and he's a little skeptical of journalists. There's a scene in HELLFIRE CLUB where Charlie and his father Winston are watching Murrow's famous takedown of McCarthy, and Charlie's reaction is that Murrow is late to the table, that a lot of other journalists have really been going after McCarthy a lot longer, that Senator, her name is escaping me now, but the senator from Maine has been going after McCarthy since 1950. And so I love Murrow, but I think it is a sad testament to TV journalism that Murrow's takedown took place in 1954 when it probably should have taken place in 1950. Here's another question for you. Somebody asked me in my interviews, I often say history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. I've been trying to find the source of that quote. Do you happen to know the source of it? I don't. I can't find who wrote it, who said it. So I always just vaguely attribute it. Is Renee Ballard going to be the natural successor for Bosch? And have you planned out the eventual retirement of Bosch? You're probably not going to reveal that, but it's a good question.
Yeah, no, I don't have any plan yet for Bosch. It's interesting. It was really weighing on me, his age. And, you know, I made a decision early on in the series to say he was born in 1950. Everything's in real time, so I'm stuck with that. This year he turned 70, and how realistic is that? And things have changed in society, and there's a real vogue in law enforcement to keep these old horses that have done a lot of detective work, especially homicide work, working. Sometimes as volunteers, sometimes as like $20 a day type things.
Yeah.
And I know people who do it. I know people that are Bosch's age that are solving murders still, mostly cold case stuff. But you know, we were filming a scene for Bosch a few years ago, and I was thinking about, do I retire Bosch? I had just had him quit the LAPD because that was stressing belief. And I was thinking, do I write about him anymore and all that? And a cop who was doing security on the set that day came up to me, and he worked for a little town inside LA called San Fernando, a little 3 square mile town, totally surrounded by LA. And that's where we happened to be filming. It was just a lucky break. He came up and said, you should have Bosch work on our cold cases. I'll take you over there. We were like 3 blocks from the police station. I said, I'll take you over and show you all our cases. No one's working. And he said, if someone can close a case, we don't care how old he is. And that has really informed everything I've written about Bosch ever since. Just this cop telling me this on a TV set is amazing. And that's how I feel. Bosch can still close cases. He can't physically chase down bad guys anymore.
Right.
But he can work with a young person like Ballard, and she can be the legs. And she also has the brains to counter Bosch and be his colleague. But it's a good team. I think she's going to keep Bosch alive in literary terms for a while.
Yeah, I don't think he needs to go anywhere. I think that people are going to be very happy with that. Redemption, this is a good question. Redemption is a core theme in the Bosch books. It seems to deepen over the series. Can you tell us how this came to be?
I don't know. I mean, I just think it's a standard thing. People are trying to, in real life as well as in fiction, people are always trying to make up for something, or they're bothered by something, a choice they made that could have had big consequences, or just could be really personal consequences. But I think that's one of the driving factors of character. And, so on one hand, it's part of like almost like a checklist. What does the character want? On one level, Bosch wants to solve a murder, but there are other levels. Jack McAvoy in this book wants to find this hidden truth. What's the connection between these deaths? But at the same time, he wants to make up for screwing up with Rachel,
Right.
and many different levels. And you can categorize almost all that under redemption. But it's really just wanting something. I remember I keep talking about advice. So from the cop on the set who told me, as long as you can close cases, you can live in literary fiction. I remember reading, I grew up loving Kurt Vonnegut, reading all his books. And I read, some Q&A where they said, what's the best piece of advice you can give a writer? And he said, make sure everybody on every page wants something, even if it's just a glass of water.
Right.
And that really defines character, and so like Harry Bosch wants stuff on all kinds of levels, from wanting to find a murderer to wanting to have a smoke. And you pull all that together, and then you start having a character that connects with readers.
Yeah, Mamet has like some 3 rules for every scene, and one of them is everybody in every scene has to want something. It's such good advice. Let me just answer one person's question here. Somebody who read the HELLFIRE CLUB. Please correct me if I'm wrong. As far as I can tell, Charlie Martyr is a wasp. Can you please explain why you didn't make your main character Jewish, and what role, if any, did the presence and resurgence of anti-Semitism play in that decision? Then Frank called that a stupid question, and then said, well, why is it? It's not a stupid question. It's actually a very insightful question. And let me just say, I actually haven't decided what Charlie Martyr's ethnicity is. I love the name Martyr because it sounds like martyr, obviously. And the only person named Martyr that I've ever met in my life was named Tzvi Martyr, who is obviously Jewish, because people named Tzvi are always Jewish. And so I actually haven't decided. Margaret is not Jewish. Margaret is Irish Catholic. But I've only said that Charlie and his dad are like some sort of outer borough ethnic, white ethnic. But I haven't really decided if they're Italian or Jewish or Greek or whatever. I haven't really kind of made up my mind on that yet. So I hope that answers that question.
Well, that can be a book. It's good that you kept stuff.
I have a lot of stuff. Yeah, there's a lot of this. Yeah, there's somebody else, the same person, Poets and Muses, who is obviously a very deep reader of the HELLFIRE Club, asks about Isaiah Street, who is the black congressman character in the HELLFIRE Club. And Isaiah, there was actually only one black congressman at the time, but I made it there too. And the second one is Isaiah. And I've definitely thought that, just to answer the question that this person asked, I've definitely thought about, like, you could do a whole book just about Isaiah Street being a Tuskegee Airman, living in the world of discrimination in the 50s and 60s. How does the Jack character, it's 7:45. So I'm just going to ask you a couple more, Michael, and then I'll bid you adieu. And then I do want to remind people that at the bottom right of the screen, it says donate, and that's to help independent bookstores and sellers and people who need help during this time. And if you have the means to do it, we would love it, even if you could just make a $5 donation, $100 donation, whatever you can afford. Michael and I are doing this to help independent bookstores and people who work for them. How has the Jack character, Jack McAvoy, evolved from the poet to Fair Warning, and why does newspaper journalism still have an important role in our digital world?
I think he's evolved where he's a couple things he's out of balance. I think in the first books, he was arrogant. It was the dawn of the internet age. So none of that had been taken away yet. The immediate movement of news around the internet. All that stuff hadn't happened yet. So he really felt like he was a prince of the city. And that's the way I felt. I would work night cops, and when I was driving home, I'd go down the 101, which is elevated in Hollywood. I would look out from the freeway from my car about midnight and think I knew all these secrets that no one knew yet. They'll get them in the morning when they get their paper. That world is gone now, and that's done something to Jack. I think if I had stayed in the business, it would have done it to me, and it's made him. I think it's made him more cynical. It's made him more kind of subliminally angry. It's made him paranoid. A lot in this book is about him thinking people are going to take his story away.
Yeah.
It used to be, he just didn't want to get scooped by the competition. Jack is looking over his shoulder in his own newsroom, and there's only 4 people in there. And I think that's kind of, he's becoming more of a feral cat as he gets older. And he's, add to that the disappointments of where he is in life. He's not writing books anymore, not riding the bestseller list, as he said. He bought a car 11 years ago with his last advance, and he looks at the odometer and he says, that's how many miles I've strayed from my goals, and it's up to 175,000. So he's kind of at sea.
Yeah, and fearing irrelevance. His character is very resonant. It's tough being a journalist. It's not an easy job, especially being a crime reporter or a newspaper reporter in this day and age. Here's my last question for you, and it's a very broad one. What is the hardest part of the process of writing a novel, and what is the most joyful? Best wishes from Hugo in Norway. Well, thank you for plugging in, Hugo in Norway. I have no idea what time it is in Norway, but it can't be early.
That'll be in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Well, the real quick answer is the first page is the hardest and the last page is the easiest. To me, starting a book is by far the hardest because it's a slog. It's you get daily fulfillments and all that, but when you need 100,000 words, for example, and you got none, that's pretty daunting. And as far as the best parts, they come every day. You can just a good day's work, just something that you're through. Little back and forth of dialogue that can really make your day. Why don't you answer those?
Well, I've only written one novel that's been published. I've written one that I'm working on. I'm working on another right now, and I wrote one that was unpublished in my 20s. Me too. The most enjoyable is, I think you're right. Like a good day's, like an idea that you're very excited about. I don't want to do a spoiler, but just as a very. There's a scene that takes place in the novel I'm working on right now that takes place at the Academy Awards in 1962, and I introduced the whole concept of seat fillers. The people that if you get up to go to the bathroom,
right,
people run in and fill your seats so that they don't see empty seats if they pan to the audience. I included that just as a lark, but then I figured out, oh wait, I can use that as a plot device. So when you kind of stumble on something like that, so that in a way that almost the reader experiences it the same way you do, which is, oh, this is fun, blah blah blah, and then, oh wait, it's actually significant. That's fun. But what's also it is you use the word slog, and it's it's I have friends who do fiction full time like you do. And one of them is Damon Lindelof, who just show ran Watchmen on HBO, which was just stupendous and so good. He did The Leftovers before that and Lost before that. And I talked to him and I'm just it's so tough. When I do nonfiction, and it's not easy being a journalist in 2020, but by the same token, I don't have to make anything up. It's all here. This is what happened, and I'm just making editorial decisions about what's most important, and but I don't have to create the content. The content is real. It's just out there. So in that way, nonfiction is a lot easier to write than fiction, because you're just reporting what's going on, and you're just trying to like present it in terms of analysis and priority and like what's important for people to understand, and the analysis of what's actually going on. But you don't have to create it. When you're doing fiction, the creation, so difficult. And that's why I have such admiration for the work you do in terms of all the characters that you breathe life into, who just seem so real, whether they're on the page or I'm watching them on Amazon.
Well, thanks. I mean, I'm just lucky. I think it's a journalism background, and I'm always quick to say I'm not a creative genius. I don't really make up a lot of what's in my books. I find it, I throw out the net. I spend time with the kind of people that I write about, and kind of gather it up and have a facility for figuring out how it fits together. And a little bit about what you're talking about, just the concept of putting it together is the challenge. But I'm not, in a room thinking, making stuff up. I'm drawing from real life most of the time.
Yeah, and fair warning really does that, because it's you already, this isn't a spoiler because you've already mentioned it, but there's a discussion of the DNA industry and Ancestry.com or 23andMe or whatever, and how there's no oversight over that by the government, and what that could mean in a worst case scenario. And it's just thrilling and awesome. And it's been a real honor talking to you, Michael. If you haven't already and you can afford to, please go to the donate key down there and help out independent bookstores and people who work for them, who are struggling during this time. And Michael, I look forward to, I hope we can keep in touch. And
yeah,
I've got, I've already read a bunch of your books, but I'm going to read a bunch more. I have some catching up to do.
Oh, well, thank you very much for doing it. Good to meet you, and good luck with your many pursuits, but definitely with the ongoing fiction writing. We need lots of good fiction writers.
Well, thank you, Michael. All right, go Birds. Right. Thanks everybody for watching. I really appreciate it. Thanks to Little Brown and Hachette for everything. And please buy Fair Warning by Michael Connelly. It's a great read. You will not regret it. You can read it in like a day or two. It's just a real page turner. You're going to want to know what happens from the minute to the minute to the minute. And then if you can't afford, please give to the independent bookstores. Okay, Michael, we'll talk soon, I hope.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.